So really, we have to recognize that our students have digital lives, and people, 75% of our students are in full-time employment, so they have work lives as well. So we've got to get this balance right. We have to recognize that people come to us with all of this stuff already, and we can't just impose our solutions on them. Another theme, and I know Jay will almost certainly be going on about this tomorrow, informal learning. For some reason, there's always been this artificial barrier between informal and formal learning. I think the same applies to training as well. Institutions try and impose top-down training as if, you will go on this course and you will be a better employee, which is crazy, and almost ignore the fact that actually I read some magazine article, which I learned a hell of a lot more from that than any course I've ever been on. And that permeates throughout higher education. But I'll leave that to George to go on at length, Jay, sorry, to go on at length about that. Hopefully you'll be talking about that tomorrow, Jay. And really, we've got to move from a situation where historically, the student has had to adapt. It's all been about the teacher and really put the student at the center of the whole experience, and the whole system has to adapt to what the learner wants. Now that could be good old instructor, and if you remember things called blackboards, if you're old enough. It doesn't matter. You can involve an instructor in this stuff, but the student has got to be at the center of it, because really, this is where they live, and it doesn't matter which, anything you think of that they might be interested in, any activity that they undertake, there's something out there for them. We put some of our courses, our cut-down versions of our courses in Facebook, and what we found was that students, all of our courses have names and these course codes. The first letter denotes the faculty, so arts courses begin with A, and then letters. The first number is the year, so A102 is an arts course, level 1. And what we found was that students formed communities around our courses based on, we had students who had previously studied the course, students who are currently studying, and students who were thinking of studying it, and they all joined together in communities. So that was very informative, but they were having a less than satisfactory experience. But it did show that community around learning was possible. Our television programs that go out on the BBC and then get syndicated in India and other countries, I'm told have annually are viewed by 1 billion people. Now that's not a billion individual people, but they have 1 billion views a year. Well, that's significant, and that's significant viewing. So you can't dismiss traditional media completely. One of the side effects of the iPlayer is there's serious concerns in the UK about it destroying the bandwidth, available bandwidth to internet users, because it is the amount of data that is being downloaded, because the viewing audience has suddenly realized that they don't have to watch programs when the BBC says they watch them. We can become our own broadcasters. I know there's lots of networks in the United States that are offering similar things to this. Hewlett Foundation in the United States, they gave us an awful lot of money, and remarkably, in about 4 months, we published 900 hours. There's now over 6,000 hours of quality assured OU material, freely available. Just Google OpenLearn and you'll find it. You can take it, you can do what you want with it. It covers hundreds of subject areas, and it's yours for free to play with, to remix, to upload, whatever you want to do with it. And there's about another 8,000 hours of other OU material there as well that you can have for nothing. Just take it and do it, and we'll continue to publish into that. iTunes U is something else. So we've got a very large presence. We've been pretty successful in publishing this sort of stuff, and I can bore you with the stats, but an awful lot of people are accessing this stuff as well. So people are taking the stuff, but what they're not doing in any great number is giving it back. And that was one of the things that the Social Learning Project, which I mentioned, set out to address. Why is it that people, excuse me, will quite happily take open educational resources and say thank you very much, but what they're not going to do is remix it, improve it, and then give it back? But that's exactly what everybody does in Flickr. That's what everyone does in YouTube. Every time someone uses Flickr or YouTube, they make it better, because if it's Flickr, they've added a photograph. Every time you buy something from Amazon, you improve Amazon's database, it improves the recommendations. Why isn't that happening in learning? When we started Social Learn, our institution was very concerned about what we said and didn't say, and some of our A-list bloggers actually got their hands smacked for blogging about it and are not allowed to say, and getting people to sign NDAs. I think because the original idea was this could be a revenue generating. I mean, Social Learn was conceived as something which would provide a sustainability model for open educational resources. The Apple's iTunes U stuff that we publish looks great, but it costs a fortune to produce. Well, how do you sustain that? How do you sustain publishing open educational resources? To some extent, you can make it a byproduct of your core production, but at the end of the day, there is a cost and somebody has to pay. Okay, so I've already said a bit about Social Learn, and one of the reasons that we weren't interested in the Facebook approach was that because in education, you don't just want to be with people like yourself. You actually want to be challenged. That's how you learn something, by being challenged. And you know, you don't just hang out with friends, but you know, you're actually hanging out with people who have common interests in learning. And they might not actually be your friends, but what you do have is a common learning interest. And rather than informal chat, you really are having learning conversations. Now, what we found was, as I go through these things weren't happening in Facebook. So how do you make them? How do you make these things happen? And obviously, you've actually got in-depth learning going on rather than just quick facts. People in Facebook exchange little snippets, photographs, and everything. But how do you create learning experiences? And obviously, saying that you know, a learning resource has got 3 stars doesn't mean a heck of a lot. It'd rather be nice that there was a bit more depth with endorsement, and someone said that's really good. They're telling you why it's really good, and if enough people are telling you that a learning resource is really good, then you might be convinced that it's worth your while to use it. And obviously, you know, you actually want a world of connections, and I don't have time to go into all the work we're doing around connections, but, you know, and George has articulated it very well. I mean, that's a hugely important part of this whole area, how you connect ideas and thoughts together. And obviously, you know, we also want learning recommendations. I'll say a wee bit more about that as I go forward with this thing. The building blocks, there's obviously the social networking and the community side of it, and we all know that that is really crucial. How do you create a significantly large learning community? The likelihood is what we will do is that we will launch this thing rather than to the world initially, we will launch it to the wider Open University community, and that's rather large. We have 500,000 people, alumni, people currently studying, and we know all about them. We communicate with them electronically. So if we can create a learning community, an active learning community with 500,000 Open University former, previous, thinking about becoming students, we can have the confidence to then give it away to the world and say, here you go, have a go with this thing. So that's obviously a key part of it. An open platform, hopefully it will be open, it'll be open source for all to play with. And then there's the more complex area, what we call conceptual networking. And really that really came out of some work, this goes back to the 70s, this sort of issue-based information system, where you're addressing an issue and you want an answer, and then you want to support and challenge. So it's this whole issue of argumentation, which we see as the critical thinking and a key part of the learning. And then of course you can have a number of answers and different arguments taking place. And then learners and educators can contribute. So someone might just post a comment, someone else might add resources to enhance that contribution. And now we're really getting down to more specifically about asking a question, because what we decided was that one of the hardest things about learning is knowing what question to ask, you know. And if you can have a system that as you start to ask a question starts to tell you, well, these are other questions, similar questions that other people are asking who are trying to learn the same thing, that might be quite helpful to a learner. And so those are some of the things that we've experimented with. And then we've come up with the idea, which is hardly a new idea, of learning paths, where you have steps along a path with reflection points where people can actually pause and think about what they're doing. And each step can have resources to enhance it or activities. And so a simplest path would just be annotating web pages. And if someone says, I found this site and that site, and these are my thoughts about why that's relevant, rather than just treating them discretely, if you coherently string them together, you might have a significant resource that you could offer to someone who wants to learn about something if someone is saying that this path actually helps them learn about it. The more complicated paths, and this is what we found we paid people to author paths. Of course, they created narrative and then embedded YouTube and Wikipedia, but they were academics, so they wrote textbooks, and they all produced these unbelievably complicated paths with each step would take you like 20 hours to study. So arguably one could say, and we did consider doing it, we could take all of our open education resources, and these are in effect OU mini courses, 20 hours. One 20-hour course could be a step along the path of learning about something. But a path on its own isn't very interesting. What gets interesting is when paths spawn other paths. And this is where you get the real, the equivalent of the social networking, the Flickr, the YouTube. A learner comes along and is on a path is actually, this is how I would do it, and they publish another path. And they are creating more and more resources for a learner. But all those learners are trying to learn the same thing, but all of these new learning resources are being generated. And the hope is that this gets over this problem of academics not being particularly interested of contributing back into a system like this or into this type of thing. They will absorb the stuff and say, that was great, but I'm not willing to actually put my slant on it and then give it back to the community. Obviously, these paths then result in more argumentation. One path might support or challenge something else as well. So this is the type of thing that we've been exploring in the thing that we built. It ends up with this huge, neat web of this conceptual network of ideas and connections with dialogue and argumentation. Interesting enough, if you layer it together with the social networking layer, you couldn't effect get what some people are starting to talk about as Web 3.0, a semantic web. For the future, well, I think there's a real opportunity for open social learning. Obviously, this whole idea of creating real, not only to create the learning communities, but to sustain them. I was interested in Alejandro's saying about people coming to Facebook and say it's great, but for how long? And then they get bored. So would you bet your house on Facebook? Would you bet all your money that Facebook will even exist in 3 years' time? I don't know. You know, I don't think I would. It probably will, but I don't know whether it will or not. But can you create and nurture a real learning community? Can you extend reach? So this stuff's available to everybody. I mean, maybe it was ambitious, but one of the reasons we got into the open educational resources area was to make our material available to third world Africa. We had a vice chancellor in South Africa. She was very passionate about making free materials available to Africa and other parts of the world. The idea of a personalized learning experience is self-evident, and I think I'm preaching to the converted here, that I think everyone in this room probably recognizes that people expect a personalized learning experience. The thing that's held traditional education back, the English word is the cohort, a group of people who all start studying on the same day and all finish studying on the same day, so they all have to have an equal experience. Well, I think we're well past that now, and it is all about the individual learner, not about cohorts of learners. This stuff empowers teachers. There'll always be a place for teachers. It most certainly does not replace teachers, but it definitely empowers them. It's the hardest thing in the world to stand in front of a classroom in a lecture hall every day and be funny. And you know, I can think of 2 or 3 great teachers I had in my entire education career. But I think a lot of this stuff really empowers them, and we're seeing a lot of good examples now of teachers being empowered by all this stuff. And finally, it might well sustain a learning marketplace, and the learning marketplace itself might provide the sustainability for open educational resources. Because as I said earlier, at the end of the day, someone's got to pay if you're giving stuff away one way or the other, and maybe a learning marketplace will become a reality.